So these kind of things, I think you would gain only when you take reading seriously and going back to the original source. And I would bet that every time you look at a manuscript, there's something new can be said.
So Bill, thank you very much for agreeing to do this interview with me. We are here at the ISF Academy in Cyberport, Hong Kong. This is your setting where you work, and this is a lovely studio.
Oh, thank you.
So to begin, can you tell us, please, how you got into this profession of being a scholar, being an academic?
Right. Well, I started off as a linguistics major at McGill, and after I graduated with concentration in Asian languages and Sanskrit, I was really not sure what I was going to do. I came back to Hong Kong, and that was 97 at Hanover, and I thought I would just earn enough money to come back to Canada to continue with my graduate studies in linguistics. And then I end up working for a number of years, traveled quite a bit, and that's not until 2003, and that was SARS. And then I realized it's time to do something more serious.
Okay.
So I went back to university to do a master's degree in Buddhist studies, and it was there that I met Professor Wang Banwei, who later became my supervisor for my doctoral work at Peking University. So I ended up doing a PhD in Beijing on Prajnaparamita and the Sanskrit manuscript and the commentarial tradition. I spent a year in Hamburg working with Harunaga Isaacson, which was a complete eye-opener to me. And then before I finished the PhD degree, I went to Japan. I did end up getting the first PhD, but I started with a second PhD program in Japan in Indology.
Okay.
And that was in the year 2009, and that was the World Sanskrit Conference where I met Professor Yano Michio. And we just had a casual chat, and I discovered his work in astro-science in Asia. So he worked on astronomy, astrology, and Ayurveda, many different topics, but in particular, astronomy in the Buddhist tradition. And I became very excited about it because during our conversation, we discovered that there are very few people who have this combination of training in philology and Buddhism, and also interest in astronomy, which happened to be my childhood passion, astronomy. So, and I ended up spending 10 years in Japan, reading Sanskrit text, and also Chinese text and other languages. And I became established in this field during those 10 years, working on Sanskrit astronomical or astro manuscripts.
Okay, and what pushed you to study Buddhism in the first place, and then later Sanskrit?
Yeah, I think SARS must be one of the reasons. It really made you think about life and death. But I was always very interested in text, religious text, and Buddhism. I was not a Buddhist before. During the process, I became a Buddhist. But in retrospect, I seem to have moved from across different fields, from linguistic Buddhist studies and Indology and now history of science. But actually they are connected in the sense that I think you start with the sources. So you need to have basic language training. And unfortunately that I just went into linguistics almost by chance. And then, I mean, after you have the language, you have the basic competence, and then what do? You want to read something that interests you. And Buddhist text is something that interests me. And after I spend enough time working on a Buddhist text, I realized that actually there are a lot of things in the Buddhist text, not just the Buddha Vajana, not just teaching of the Buddha, but also mythology and science and architecture, art and literature.
Yeah. Okay, that's true. And so you mentioned like having a foundation in reading texts. How, and we've talked about this
Yes, we did.
quite a bit. And so how important do you think it is for doing research to sort of base yourself strongly in text?
Well, extremely. And I think in the Chinese tradition, I mean, it's taken for granted, right? When you talk about 小学, 小学, you need to have a mastery of the language and then the text before you do anything else, like history and ultimate philosophy. And I think very often students these days want to do something new, and they want to say something that has never been said before. Or to write a paper that is worth publishing, you need to do something that has not been done already. So there's a temptation to skip the sources and just go to the secondary and then come up with something that is exciting or trendy. But ultimately, whatever trends you're trying to follow, like academic disciplines you go into, you have to go back to the source, because those are your primary evidence. Whether it's historical studies, art history, or whatnot. So without a strong foundation in textual studies, there's actually nothing useful you can say. So I feel very strongly that students should be given enough time and to actually given guidance, reading text. And I consider myself very fortunate having this experience both in Beijing, but to a large extent in Japan, when I actually read text in a very mindful and meticulous way. But there's also slow reading and also fast reading, so we can talk about that all day. But still, that is something that cannot be skipped at all.
Okay, and so part of this being familiar with text, part of this attitude towards text is also the knowledge of languages, I assume, right?
Absolutely.
So when you work on a Buddhist tradition, you cannot just focus on a single language probably, but you need to take into account evidence from different languages. So what do you think about this, the ability to learn languages, or the willingness to learn languages? How important is that?
Well, languages are extremely important because that's the basis of everything. I think the challenge is knowing how much you need to acquire, because it's an endless journey. Yeah. When people ask you how many languages you know, we talk about this, right? And you say, oh, I know, let's say 7 languages. But what does knowing mean? To what degree of competence would you call yourself a knower of a language? And for researcher, I think the challenge, once again, is balancing how much the time you spend on this training and versus actually using it. And I think it's kind of like 2 legs. You kind of go one after another. They have to go simultaneously. You cannot spend all your time in just the language training, the linguistic and analysis. You actually have to apply it. And there's no better way to apply your language skill than actually reading and working on your sources. And my experience with the astro text is very often we take reading too lightly. We think, oh, it has been read already thousands of times, like the Diamond Sutra. What more needs to be read? But then if you don't read it, there's nothing more to be said. And actually, the more you read something, the more insight you would gain. Sometimes it could be very surprising insight. And my personal experience working with a Sanskrit astro text, with the case of the Yavana Jataka, and everyone thought that there's nothing more could be said because David Pingree has said it all, and there's like 2 tomes on the Yavana Jataka with meticulous apparatus. So what else could be said? And then when we got the manuscript from Nepal, and that's what I thought. But I thought, well, just for fun, I mean, you get this beautiful manuscript, why not read it again? And then I found out, oh, it's not that simple. The apparatus is actually maybe incorrect. Maybe there are silent emendations. So maybe Pingree wanted to be read in a certain way, but it actually does not say that in the manuscript. It was this claim, for example, in the manuscript, there's the earliest 0, bindu. So it's a sensational claim, earliest 0. And then I look at the manuscript, it's not there. It's his own emendation. So these kind of things, I think you would gain only when you take reading seriously and going back to the original source. And I would bet that every time you look at a manuscript, there's something new can be said. And I suppose this could be your personal experience.
Yeah. I mean, especially when teaching, you're kind of forced to read the same text over and over, right? And you
Yes,
think
with the students.
Yeah, you think that maybe it's sometimes you think it's kind of boring or something, maybe not so interesting, but you do get insights even after reading it the 25th time with students. It's an amazing process of getting deeper into a text. Okay, and so you're working on astro-sciences and sort of the history of this and text related to it. Why did you get interested in this? You said it was a childhood passion of yours, and so how that turned into a career.
Well, I was a science student from the beginning. Even when I was admitted to McGill, I was actually accepted into the program of chemical engineering. I always wanted to be a scientist, and astronomy was my passion. But the reason why I'm interested in this astro text and including Buddhist texts as well is the linguistic dimension. You ask about the kind of the different languages and how multiple languages played a role in the research. And I personally, I don't consider myself a gifted linguist, although I did end up learning over 20 languages. Of course, not all of them successfully, I must say, but I think precisely I feel that this is something that I found challenging and also extremely interesting when you have 2 extremely sort of at the ends of the spectrum. You have Sanskrit and Chinese. How do ideas in Sanskrit, how do they get translated into Chinese? That for me is an extremely fascinating process. And the scientific ideas are also very interesting because you would think that scientific ideas are fixed, or there's a dimension of sort of immutable truth to the content, but no, actually, you always see through a certain lens. There's cultural filters, way to express even a scientific idea that are constrained even sometimes by the language, and I find that totally fascinating.
Okay, and so you said 20 languages and that you're not gifted in
Yes.
terms of learning languages, but I think most people would consider that very, very exceptional, speaking or learning 20 languages.
Learning, yes.
Yeah, but I know that you're very passionate about Esperanto, right? Because
Well, people tend to make jokes about it. So I would tell people, no, I'm not passionate about Esperanto, but I just happened to learn this language when I was a teenager. When I was in Montreal, I met this group of Esperantists who are really interesting characters, and I also travel around the world speaking the language.
And so now that you are kind of an established scholar in your field, is there something you can give as advice to younger generation of students who are learning the trade, so to speak? So what is it that they should pay attention to, or maybe how to find a good job, or maybe that's not the priority? What's the kind of the top advice or the top two advices?
Yeah, I think, well, I'm still trying to establish myself in my field, I would say. But in retrospect, I mean, if I could give myself advice, like 20 years ago, I think the foundation, the understanding of the sources and how to approach your sources, and to read as much as possible these source materials and have exposure to them, I think is very important for any scholars. And if you're in sinology, I feel that the classics you should really read. If you are in Buddhology, you should read as many Buddhist texts as you can at this early stage. And I feel a lot of graduate students that I have come across, they have not actually read the sources, at least spent enough time with the sources. And already they are sort of pushed to produce something that is philosophical or comparative. So in retrospect, I wish I had more chance to actually be exposed to these sources. And I think having colleagues who you can work with, I think that is very important. Someone you can talk to and exchange ideas. And I think if you find yourself in a community of young scholars, you can just sort of bounce ideas with constantly, and that is extremely helpful. Because I as much as I like to read, I think that I'm actually a lazy reader. I prefer audiobook. And actually I learn the most when I talk to other scholars. They would tell me what the best books are, and the latest interest of the scholars, and collaborative projects, and in those processes, I think I learn the most. So I wish I had done more of those. But in a way, I think these things sort of happen organically when you are open-minded, and try to at one level you need to be an expert, at least some kind of authority in however small your field is.
A niche.
Yeah. Let's say I am a specialist in Indian chronology or dating of the Yavana Janaka. So other scholars will at least find me marginally useful when they talk to me. I think that is helpful. But on the other hand, you want to be as open as possible. You want to learn about things as different from your field. So to have this both dimensions, I feel that is extremely important for any burgeoning scholar.
No, I totally agree. Yeah, I think it's by speaking to other people and being part of projects, different conferences, and this is how you kind of learn much of what you know about your field. Yeah, and reviewing papers. Yes. And reviewing books for others, reading dissertations. This is how you actually learn about what's happening. So you're on the front line of what is happening in a field.
That's right. I mean, that is one of the very critical thing I feel that is sometimes lacking among the Chinese scholars or in the Chinese academia. First of all, if you are in your field, you should have mastery of your field in the sense that you should know what happens, what are the frontier topics, what are the things that can be left behind, who are the movers and shakers in your field. I feel this is something that cannot be emphasized less. And book review is not something that it doesn't really exist among the Chinese academic world, but it's something that we should push for.
Okay, to do more book reviews.
Yes.
Yeah.
Without fearing that you will offend someone.
So book reviews are for young scholars or for kind of mid-career or established scholars? What do you think? Who should do the book reviews? Which ones are useful?
I think for everyone, but I have the experience when I was asked to do a book review for a Chinese work, which I thought is horrible, and it was not published. So I suppose I can understand the sensitivity. There are cultural differences, and some people don't like sort of confrontational or adversarial kind of exchange of ideas. I understand that. So maybe you have to think of some other platform that is less adversarial. Academic journals are supposed to be neutral platform. As long as you don't have like ad hominem kind of attacks, I think they should be good for established scholars. And I think they have the responsibility to review works of their peers. But younger scholars, maybe in a graduate student journal, they should have that platform also review so that other graduate student can learn about like what are better than the others.
Yeah, you're right, actually, about that. We all have this responsibility for the field and to give back, in a sense. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for spending the time with me with doing this interview.
Thank you.
It was lovely to talk to you, and it's wonderful to be here in Hong Kong and enjoying your hospitality.
Well, thank you.
Thank you very much.